Hello chums, and welcome to episode 3 of the mid-2000s Supercar Shootout, where I gather the most swoon-worthy motor vehicles from 20 years ago and subject them to a series of challenges. The 14 contenders have now been subjected to 4 different tests across 2 different videos, with a top speed test, a fuel economy test, a standing start acceleration test, and finally a 150 miles per hour to 0 braking test. If you haven't yet seen those videos, I highly recommend it. To recap, the top speed test had some fairly obvious results, with the Veyron, Enzo and Corvette making up the top 3, while the Ford GT impressed by coming in 4th. The Lamborghini Gallardo was the only real surprise, with its close ratio gearbox limiting it to one of the slowest top speeds here. The fuel economy threw up some slightly more varied results. For the most part, it was a reverse of the top speed test, except for the Lamborghini Gallardo, which once again scored no points, while the Corvette, and to a much greater extent the Ford GT and Dodge Viper, managed excellent fuel economy. In episode 2, I ran a standing start test, adding the 0 to 60, 0 to 100, and 400 meter times together to give points based on the lowest overall. The Gallardo finally scored some points here, coming in 3rd, while the usual heavy hitters took the rest of the top spots. The biggest shock here was the Mercedes-Benz SLR, underperforming and scoring no points. I then ran a braking test from 150 miles per hour, which the SLR went on to win, while the Ford GT scored no points for the first time. So far, only one car has scored points in every single round, the Chevrolet Corvette. Today, we have a couple more tests. The time has come to wrangle these bastard machines around a racetrack. Now, the choice of track was slightly contentious for myself and the voices in my head. I wasn't going to do a lap of the Nordschleife for every car because I also have a real job. Meanwhile, if I picked a track like Spa, or Fuji, or Mount Panorama, the rankings would look much the same as the top speed or acceleration tests. So I specifically wanted to choose a track that prioritizes cornering and possibly downforce while not giving too many chances for high speeds. With that in mind, the track I've gone for is Autodrome Lago Maggiore, West. At 1.5 miles per lap, it's relatively tiny, allowing me to perform more laps per car. It consists of a couple of very sharp corners, a couple of mid-speed corners, and a couple of high-speed sweepers to test the downforce. As a result, it should be the perfect track to test the overall handling characteristics of each car. Now, for this test, I will award points based on 2 things. The first is obviously the lap time. However, I also wanted to talk about the more subjective side of things, so I will also award points based on how easy, fun, or generally nice the car is to drive, and I'll be taking several things into consideration, such as sound, stability, how easy it is to drift, and more. But mainly it's a measure of how much I want to get back into the car and drive it again. I also wanted to offer up some kind of benchmark to compare these cars against, something that's completely different. So, I present to you the 1998 Subaru Impreza WRC car. With 300 horsepower, it's way down on the supercars, but it's lighter than everything else here, it has a sequential gearbox, and it's on slick tyres. It's a true David versus 14 Goliaths, handling versus brute force. Colin McRae's Subaru got around in 58.470 seconds. The gauntlet has been thrown down. Since it is currently last in the standings, the Audi R8 goes first. This is a very easy car to drive, but it's challenging to get the absolute best out of it. Despite being mid-engined, there is almost no lift-off oversteer at all, which does make it stable, but it can be difficult to get the car turned in. This is also not helped by some of the worst brakes here. It does sound rather nice in isolation, but compared to some of the machines here, the overall experience does lack some excitement. It gets a time of 1 minute, 0.346, almost 2 seconds down on the WRC car. So, it's ultra stable, easy to drive, sounds decent, and has good traction thanks to its all-wheel drive system. On the other hand, it doesn't turn in as well as one would like, has very underwhelming brakes, and you could argue it doesn't have much of a sense of humour. Next is the Alfa Romeo 8C. Like the Audi, it has a high-revving cross-plane V8, although it sounds just a tad more flat than the Audi. It's actually a very nice car to drive. It's a lot more planted than you might expect for a front-engine rear-wheel drive, and it's a very satisfying car to drive smoothly. If you want to have a bit more fun, the Alfa feels slightly unwilling. There's no lift-off oversteer to speak of, so you can't throw it into a corner like some other cars here, and if you try and power slide or drift, it takes some persuasion to begin with, and it can quite easily bite you in the arse and just over-rotate. As for the time, it's 4/10 behind the Audi. Overall, it has a lot of the same characteristics. It's slightly more entertaining though, but it sounds slightly worse. Between the two though, I would probably rather drive the Alpha. Next up, we have the Dodge Viper SRT10. Despite the Viper's reputation for being one of America's most prolific serial killers, it's actually very friendly on its default sports hard tyres. The super wide rear tyres keep the car very planted, so it's quite similar to the Alpha, though its immense torque does make the Dodge slightly more tail happy, which is fun. It still feels mostly unwilling to do much full-on drifting, but once you get the hang of it, it's great fun, whether you drive smoothly or grab it by the scruff of the neck. Naturally though, the experience is dominated by the engine, which sounds fantastic, and has power pretty much everywhere. It gets a time of 59.923. As a car to enjoy, there is not much to dislike. It sounds awesome, and for the most part, it's quite forgiving. It does take some time to work out how to drift it though. I then took out the TVR Tuscan, which has been fantastic for fuel economy and rubbish for everything else. Without any upgrades, the TVR is frankly a bit shit, assuming you're trying to go fast. The brakes feel non-existent, and it absolutely does not want to be driven smoothly, and as a result there's very little fun to be had. Until you start treating it like you hate it. This car wants to go sideways, and it's one of the easiest cars here to control once it's over the limit. If you want a car to drive like a twat, this is easily top of the list. If you want to go hot lapping, it's easily the bottom of the list, because my best time with it was a 1 minute 1 second .007. So, it's brilliant fun for drifting, and it's bad at everything else. Even the sound is too muted because the real Tuscan sounds terrifying. The Porsche 997 GT3 goes next, and it's OP. It's one of the least powerful cars here, but nobody told it that as it fires itself into corners and surges out of them with absolute precision. There's almost none of the stereotypical Porsche 911 lift-off oversteer, and there's almost none under power either. It genuinely feels like it has four-wheel drive. As a result of that and the comparatively high downforce, it's an utter weapon on track, but it's perhaps a little too friendly. It gets a time of 59.501, 4/10 ahead of the Viper. If you want a car to be consistent in, this is just as stable as the Audi R8 but without any of the understeer. It just does what you expect it to, and sounds very good doing it. Like the Audi though, there isn't much excitement. Next up we have the Ferrari 430 Scuderia. It's performed average to decent in most tests so far, but here it's in its comfort zone. It's one of the lightest cars here, and it produces more downforce than just about everything else here as well. As a result, it carries some very impressive speeds through corners. It does feel quite edgy and prone to oversteer, which is certainly entertaining, though the car feels quite busy, for lack of a better word. It's still forgiving despite that, it's just that you often have to make small corrections to the steering. Without any upgrades though, the flat pane V8 sounds uninspiring. The lap time isn't though, as it manages a 59.146. So it's an almost perfect track car with exciting edgy handling while still being easy enough to handle, but it is slightly let down by its sound. The Mercedes-Benz SLR goes next. With 600 horsepower, fast gear shifts and the best brakes here, we should have a good performer. The way it drives on track is among the best here. The brakes are so good that they can rescue some rather idiotic driving. The car is more tail happy than everything here but the TVR, but it's much more controllable before the limit. Once beyond the limit, it will light up its rear tyres without issue. Couple that with the awesome supercharger whine, and this is easily one of the most fun cars here. And one of the slowest! 59.776 places it only just ahead of the Dodge Viper. In terms of fun and driving characteristics, it's more or less my favourite car here, with what feels like no downsides, except pace. Turns out it's very slow. The Ford GT takes to the track next. So far it's done better than expected with everything except braking, and you can certainly tell here. The brakes really let the car down in what is overall a very good driving experience. It's easy to drive smoothly for a fast lap, and it's entertaining when you want it to be, though the V8 engine doesn't sound quite angry enough for my liking. The impressive top speed of this car can't be utilised here to make up for those brakes, so it only gets a 59.291, which is just behind the Ferrari 430. So, it's a good car to drive in almost every way, it's just that the brakes really do spoil the fun, especially if you've just driven the SLR or the 430. The Corvette goes next, and so far it's the only car that scored points in every single round, but only just. The brakes were decent, and the acceleration was hampered by a lack of traction. Despite that, it's actually very planted. It's really quite an easy car to drive, though it is hard to get the absolute best out of it. The rather immense rear grip also makes it difficult to drift, should you want to behave like a child. However, once you get used to it, much like the Viper, it is very fun to slide. The awesome power-to-weight ratio doesn't quite match up to the Impreza, as the Corvette gets a 58.863. Into hypercar territory now with the Porsche Carrera GT. So far the Carrera hasn't quite lived up to expectations, being rather far down the leaderboard. It's easily one of the best sounding cars in the game, let alone in this selection of 14 cars. In terms of overall characteristics, it's much like the Ferrari F430, except with a godly soundtrack. It's tail-happy, edgy and exciting, but much more forgiving than its reputation for murdering rich people would suggest. It's also got some very good downforce values, so it's our first car to beat the Impreza with a time of 58.186. Subjectively, this car doesn't really have much of a downside. It's got all of the same track-slaying, fun-loving perks as the Ferrari 430, but it's coupled with a high-revving V10. What's not to like? Speaking of V10s, the Gallardo goes next. The Gallardo scored nothing in Episode 1, and then performed very admirably in Episode 2. Out of all the cars here, the Gallardo is the one that feels like it has the most mechanical grip. Which is to say that if all of these cars had no downforce, the Gallardo would probably take the corners the fastest. It's well known in Gran Turismo 7 for lift-off oversteer, but when unmodified it's much more manageable. That oversteer can actually be used to great advantage to get the car turned into a corner, while the four-wheel drive system can fire it back out again. It is very difficult to truly use this to your advantage though. It just beats the Porsche with a time of 58.131. So, V10 soundtrack, razor-sharp front end, easy to rotate and super fast overall, but it's hard to make all of that work completely to your advantage. The Gallardo's bigger sibling goes next. Now I did say that the Carrera GT is one of the best sounding cars in the game, but I will go out on a limb and say this sounds even better. Handling feels much like the Gallardo, but smoother, slightly less on a knife edge. This is the easier car to drive, and you could argue that it lacks some excitement as well as some turning, but that is cancelled out by the noise. I managed a 58.007. To give you an idea of how this car drives, my first lap was a 58.086. I then spent half an hour trying to beat it, assuming that my first lap couldn't possibly be my best. Well, it more or less was. Endless 58.1 lap times. Consistency and sound, but maybe a tad numb. Next up is the Ferrari Enzo. Its V12 is nowhere near as nice to listen to as the Murcielago, but it's still a V12. The Enzo has the most downforce here by quite a margin, and it uses that to great advantage. There is a fair bit of wheel spin from low speeds, but it is easy enough to control. The car does not want to drift at all, but there is some fun to be had hot lapping this car, and it's just about perfect for it. It gets a 57.552, almost a second ahead of the Impreza WRC car, so it has a decent V12 sound, and it's a track weapon thanks to easy handling and downforce. Some users may find it difficult to drive without traction control though, thanks to high power and close ratio gears. Finally, the oversized, ugly Volkswagen enters the chat. The best way to describe how this car handles is ugly. It's just a bit of a bastard. It doesn't want to rotate at all. It's the most stable, understeery car here, and it's easily the worst sounding, thanks to the W16 sounding like a cross between a Malaise-era American V8 and a depressed, lazy V6. There is no drama, there is no fun to be had, and it's totally numb, partly due to the fact it's the only car here with zero front downforce. I do not want to drive this car. However, it is the fastest. 57.497 beats the Enzo by a whisker. So, it's very fast indeed, but I hate it. Let's dole out some points. So, the order of the lap times. The Veyron, Enzo and Murcielago take the top 3 spots. The Ferrari 430 and Porsche 911 GT3 overperform, and the SLR once again doesn't match expectations. The Porsche Carrera GT finally gets a decent finish, and the Corvette, yet again, scores points, keeping up its record as the only car that has scored points in every single round. So the Veyron annoyingly drags itself further away from the field with another win. The Enzo gets another podium, as does the big Lambo. The small Lambo has now cleared the Mercedes SLR, which is being carried by its braking performance. The Ford GT only just scrapes another point finish to bring it clean of the TVR Tuscan. The Porsche Carrera GT has dragged itself out of the gutter and into the midfield. Meanwhile, the Corvette earns 3 more points from a respectable finish to bring itself level with the Carrera. Keep in mind, outside of the Tuscan, the Corvette is the cheapest car here. So we've doled out points for the lap time, but now I need to rank these cars for subjective driving feel. I will rank these in order of how much I want to drive them. I'm sure this won't piss people off at all. So, it is my opinion that the Veyron is stone dead last. It's a ghastly car to drive, and it sounds like a fat child blowing bubbles in a bathtub. Now, the rest of the cars all have redeeming features. The DVR Tuscan goes next. It's great fun if you're arsing about skidding everywhere, but it's awful to drive if you don't want to be a pillock. 0 points. The Audi R8 is the polar opposite. It's completely devoid of any dramatics. It's smooth and easy to drive, which is a positive, but it's just not all that fun. 0 points. The Porsche 911 is next, with much the same pros and cons as the Audi, but with a slightly more interesting soundtrack from its flat 6. 0 points. The Alfa Romeo 8C is actually a really nice car to drive smoothly, because it takes more concentration than the Audi and the Porsche, but it's stable enough for that to be a possibility, unlike the TVR. The sound is lacking though, and it doesn't like to be a hooligan. 0 points. One step higher is the Ford GT. Its brakes let it down more than anything, but the sound is just a tad lacking as well. So that's all of the cars that don't score points. What about the ones that do? From this point onwards, there really isn't much separating 8th from 1st. In 8th, I'm going to put the Enzo. It's an absolute track weapon, but you do spend most of your time in 3rd gear because of the wheel spin, and it's a bit one-sided, meaning it's good for track driving, but it's unwilling to be a hooligan. The front end does feel a tad numb, and the rear end will not break traction unless you're trying to unalive yourself. The Dodge Viper is in 7th. I love driving this car. It pretty much does whatever you ask of it, and the torque-heavy V10 engine just adds to the experience. In 6th we have the Corvette. It's more exciting thanks to its power, and it's a forgiving car no matter what you try to do. It can feel slightly too stable at times though, and it doesn't sound quite as good as the Viper. In 5th I have the Gallardo. It's edgy and it has a V10. There's nothing really to complain about. Just beating it is the Ferrari 430 Scuderia. It is excellent to drive. The only letdown is the V8 engine sound, which really isn't bad at all, it's just that present company is better. 3rd goes to the Murcielago. It's a beautifully smooth car to drive, but it does lack some excitement. But the V12 engine sound just elevates the entire car. Without the sound, it would probably only just scrape points, if at all. Picking a winner from the remaining 2 was very difficult, but I have to place the Mercedes SLR in 2nd. It's a total hooligan, and it's begging you to drive it like a total moron. And it's one of the least punishing cars here when you do so. It's also good to drive smoothly as well, and we can't forget the unique supercharger whine. However, with all of those benefits, plus a screaming V10 and better overall lap times, the Porsche Carrera GT has to take the win. It can do track driving, and it can do the silly stuff, and it sounds awesome. So, the Veyron is still in the lead, while the Murcielago is even with the Ferrari Enzo. The Porsche Carrera GT, SLR and Gallardo are clear of the rest of the field, while the Corvette is best of the rest. The Audi R8 and Alfa Romeo 8C, meanwhile, are trailing behind the rest of the field. So, that was episode 3 of the mid-2000s Supercar Shootout. This is the last episode where the cars are tested in their stock form, because next time I'll be upgrading the supercars to see how they perform at 700 performance points. Is there a test you want to see carried out? Let me know in the comments below. Did you enjoy this video? Then please do like, subscribe, and smack my bell so that you get notified of my future uploads. Take care of yourself, and ta-ra.